In this video, we're going to cover how to encrypt data when you insert data in ServiceNow from a web service call, or you insert data into ServiceNow through bulk update, so an import set. So first thing we're going to do is go up to ServiceNow Share. So you can see here on the screen we're at share.servicenow.com, and just type in encryption. And this will bring up one of the results here is EasyEncryption. So go ahead and click on that, and you'll see that Ben Hollifield, one of our professional services consultants, put this application together. And the goal here again is to be able to encrypt data when you're inserting it through a web service call or through a bulk update. For just standard encryption in forms, when you're already logged in, that's already supported by our built-in encryption. So the first thing you need to do is download this, and you'll need to install it in your instance. But before you do that, it does require that you have the encryption plugin turned on. So let me show that to you here real quick. So encryption support, you need to have encryption support turned on in order to use this application. So the next thing we'll do here is look at, once you turn on encryption support, there are encryption rules, encryption contexts, encryption history, and properties. So first thing you want to do is go into properties, and there's actually instructions in here as to how to set up the instance for encryption support. You can see context, etc., the user that it's using. All this is changeable, but probably fine to leave this as it sits. In addition to that, make sure you put in a password here. I've done some testing, and it seems on occasion when I've tested, if I didn't put a password there, it seems to trip it up a bit. So make sure you put that in. And then once you've done that, what you'll do is you'll select the role. So I'll just go to roles here real quick. That is going to use a particular encryption context. So if I go to, in this case, admin, you'll notice over here that the admin I've set to use primary encryption context. So primary encryption context is a context I set up using the encryption support section here. So encryption context, I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And when I click on that, it'll take us into this context. Now, this key is automatically generated, so you don't need to do anything here as far as manually creating these keys or doing anything special to create these keys. So if you click New, you give it a name, it's going to generate the context, or I should say the key, for you. And you can also choose the encryption algorithm. So I've left it as AES 128 for this example. So after you've got that set, and you've associated this context with your role, so it's likely going to be your admin role, then the next thing you can do is set up encryption rules. And what this does is indicate what tables you want to use encryption in. So here I've selected incident, and I've set no condition, so it's always going to fire. And that's really it. I picked the context that it's going to use. There's really nothing else you need to do here. You can encrypt attachments as well if you want to do that. If you wanted to do it for other tables, you can obviously add those here. One thing to note, this is only available on task-based tables. So the tables that encryption works on are tables that have been inherited from task. Okay, so we've got all of that set up, and so what actually happens, I'm going to just walk through a sample here when you go in and create a new incident, and I'm logged in as Pat Administrator right now. So when you first install encryption support and then the EasyEncryption application from Share, it's going to create this to be encrypted and encrypted data fields. So when I put in something like to be encrypted, I can just type in test here and go ahead and hit save. What that does is actually move that data from the to be encrypted field to this encrypted data field. Now the reason I can read this is because I'm logged in as admin, so I have rights to be able to read that data. However, if I switch over and try to view that, so we're on incident, let's see, 10 here. If I try to view that as Jane Worker, so let me just go to that incident. So there's the incident, click on the, you'll notice up here at the top it says this record contains secured information, and it hides that secured information. So Jane Worker cannot see it. In addition to that, the data is stored encrypted in the database. So that's ultimately what's happening here, and that form behavior you see, that's usable based on the should say supported with the encryption support out of the box plugin that we have. Where the Easy Encryption comes in is when you've got a web service call or a bulk upload where you want to encrypt the data. So what we'll do here real quick is I'll switch over to admin, and I'll just show you too, if you want to encrypt additional fields, I've added a couple of other fields here. You see SSN input and SSN encrypted, and that's actually what I'm going to be showing you in our example here. So if you want to add multiple fields, you can. So I'm going to switch over here to SOAP UI, and in SOAP UI, here's our request. You'll notice that I have this USSN input field, and I'm giving it that value, and then to be encrypted here, I'm just typing in test WS. And so those two values are going to be passed in, but because web services use the system account, they don't normally encrypt this stuff properly. So using Easy Encryption fixes that problem. And so I'll run this just so you can see what happens here. Alright, so we've created incident 11. Come back, and actually I'll do it from Opera here, and we'll go back. So I'm logged in as Jane Worker. Alright, so there's incident 11. And you can see in this case, to be encrypted is empty and SSN input is empty because both of those fields contained encrypted data that Jane Worker does not have, or does not have the security context to see. If I switch over and use Pat Administrator and go to that record, Pat Administrator sees the value that came in for to be encrypted, and it's been moved into the encrypted data field, test WS, and then the data that was in SSN input has been moved over to the SSN encrypted field, and of course Administrator can see that as well. You see this lock here indicating this is encrypted data, and there's the value that I passed in. And so that is an example of doing it through a web service, and again, you can add as many of these fields as you want, and I'll show you here in a minute the business rules that allow you to do that. The next one I wanted to show was importing. So we've got 3 fields here, I should say 3 records here in an import import file that I'll pull in. So let me just do that through the UI. Go down to load data. So I'll just call this test SSN import. Pick our file. So we've got our sample HR incidents CSV. Go ahead and click on that. Header row is number 1, worksheet number 1. Alright, so it imported that successfully. And I can create a transform map for this. Let's call this test. And so here's our source table. I'm going to go ahead and target the incident table. We want to run business rules. That should be fine. I'll go ahead and go to mapping assist here. And so we have social security number, which I'm going to map to SSN input. And I added that field to the incident record, by the way, so I added those two fields. I don't think I've mentioned that yet. And then I'll map short description to short description, and that's all we're using for this example, but you could have many fields here if you needed to. Go ahead and save that. Go ahead and run the transform. Okay, so there we are. So now what we should see, if I go back to my incident list, is we see those 3 incidents. So HR1, HR2, HR3. So those are the short descriptions I had. If I go to any of those incidents, and you'll see there SSN input is empty And we've got the social security number there, so that's for HR1. We'll do that for HR2 as well, just to show that there's multiple that have come in here. So that worked as expected for all three of these records. Okay, so at this point we've demonstrated how to call a web service and pass in data and have it automatically be encrypted with a particular security context, or I should say encryption context. And the same goes for uploading data or importing data, like I just showed here, that CSV. So the way this works from a business rule perspective is there are a number of business rules. I'll just go to them actually from this form here. So if you go to your incident business rule list, just type in *encrypt. This will bring you to, let's see, I guess we've got six different business rules that have encryption in them. You really only need to worry about a couple here. So the primary one is this encryption, encrypt fields, and attachments. And when you look at that script, there's a section in here, this if clause, and you'll notice here that I've got current.toBe encrypted, so that's what gets added automatically by the EasyEncryption application. Then I added this SSN input field and the SSN encrypted fields, and you can see those there. So all it took was I just had to add that to this business rule, and now when it runs, it does the encryption for me. So very easy to get that to work. So if you add additional fields, let's say you had SSN and some other identifier, whatever it might be, you can just simply add additional if clauses here, and it'll handle it for you. In addition to that rule, another rule you might want to look at is there's check encryption contexts. And so what this does, and you would need to add here, I didn't for our example, but you could add any fields you added here to make this message show up, because the gist of it is this is going to display this message. So if people log in and you want them to know that there's encrypted data that they don't have access to, you can use this to do that. So it's a quick and easy way to do it. I didn't implement it in this particular example, but where you would implement it would be where I showed you there, where the current dot encrypted data, you could put in USSN or whatever other fields you use there as well. So you need to look at that, or you can consider using that business rule if you want to show that. And then other than that, if you want to log the data as well, so if you want to have an audit trail for whenever someone does manipulate that data, you can do that here with this update data log, and you can see that it's looking at encrypted data. So you would put in SSN here for our field, so you can just add another section here and basically just emulate exactly what's happening here for the encrypted data field. So that's the end of this video on encryption, and this shows you now that you can encrypt data from a web service, encrypt data from import sets, and then also have data that's encrypted through the normal encryption support plugin.